Saving the American Dream. Thousands of striking auto workers hold up signs with that slogan as they fight for better wages and better working conditions. In their words, they're fighting for the American dream. David Leonhardt of the New York Times has written a history of the American dream in his new book, Ours Was the Shining Future. It's not just a slogan. The idea is at the heart of the political and economic debates we see on picket lines and at campaign rallies. And David joins me now. Welcome, David. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I know there's a whole book behind this idea, but define the American dream for us.
So it comes from a 1931 book, which is remarkable because 1931, of course, is the Great Depression, in which an author named James Truslow Adams says it is the most important idea that the United States has contributed to the world, which is that citizens of every rank can expect to have a better, richer, happier life. That's the American dream when it was first defined. And I actually think the way people think about it is remarkably similar still.
And how healthy was it post Truslow Adams's definition, and how healthy is it now?
Well, when he came up with the term, there were all kinds of reasons to think that it wasn't that healthy. Right. But in fact, it quickly became to be. So 92% of Americans who were born in 1940 went on to earn more money than their parents did. That's remarkable. Think about how many of these families would have endured a layoff or a health crisis, and yet still the vast majority across races, 92%, grew up to earn more money than their parents. For young people today, the odds are roughly 50-50, according to academic research. It's basically a coin flip. That's so different for a society.
And that connects from being a campaign reporter with the idea that always candidates would say the next generation is going to be better than the one before it. So you've brought it to concrete terms, but that's those are the numbers behind that promise. So how useful are political campaigns in being the place and the way through which people get the policies that would allow the American dream to continue?
Yeah, we're living in an age when people are so cynical about politics, as you experience when you go out on the campaign trail. And I understand why people are cynical about politics. I mean, the statistics we've just talked about are one reason for people to be frustrated. But I really think Americans shouldn't lose sight of the fact that actually the political system has a kind of amazing record of changing this country. So whether it's the labor movement in the 1940s and 50s, whether it's the civil rights movement in the 1960s, the women's movement, the disability rights movement, more recently, the movement for marriage equality, or coming from the political right, the incredible grassroots movement that changed abortion laws in red states and ultimately elected people to appoint different Supreme Court justices. So our political system is enormously powerful. I think part of the problem is we haven't really had a movement from either the Democratic or Republican Party that's organized around trying to lift the living standards of most Americans.
And is that because, so you've named the problem is there, and people feel it because we have poll after poll that shows people feeling like the economy is unfair, they feel like they're not doing well. Is it because politicians aren't listening, or that it is just more profitable as a politician to rile people up on cultural issues or on other kinds of issues, and not these ones that you've put at the center of your book?
It's certainly complex, right? And politicians have a hard job. But I think you put your finger on something important there, which is a lot of our fights really are about these cultural issues. And look, those are real divisions, and I understand why people feel so strongly about them. But the result is we really don't have movements in this country that are significantly focused on trying to lift the living standards of particularly working class people, particularly people without a college degree. The Democrats have increasingly become the party of college graduates and affluent professionals. And the Republican Party really does still seem committed to this economic vision from the 1980s that really hasn't delivered the results that Republicans promised it would. And so I think a big part of it is our focus is elsewhere rather than on doing things that would really make a difference to most people's living standards.
Now, let me ask you about three pieces of legislation which might touch on what you've written about, which is the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the infrastructure bill. Are those aimed and getting at some of the issues that you're talking about? And is it then a question of the work's being done, people just don't recognize it?
I think those are important contributors. I think when you look at some of the best decades and best years of economic growth we had in this country, they were in part because of huge investments that we were making as a society. Bipartisan investments, right? The FDR and Truman started some of them. No president in the 20th century increased investments in the future more than Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican. We really got away from that recently. President Biden seems to recognize that. And some of this legislation, semiconductors, infrastructure that you mentioned, that is the kind of thing that really in the past has made a major difference for economic growth. But it's not a cure-all. And so some of it is that it's going to take a long time. But other parts of it are we also have all kinds of other problems with tax rates, with people's ability to win raises in their jobs. So I think those things in that legislation, I think they're important and probably positive economically, but they're going to take a while and they're not enough.
And a tiny bright spot in the sense that they were bipartisan.
Some of them were, yeah. The Infrastructure Bill and the CHIPS Act.
Finally, and quickly, where do you see the opportunities for the possibilities of mass movement? And I mean, do you see it in the labor movements that in the labor strikes? And in the presidential campaign, is there a way that voters can take their campaign back, as Bill Clinton used to say, instead of letting it be about whatever the politicians want it to be about?
Look, labor unions are vital. Historically, there's nothing that gives people raises the way labor unions can. Labor unions are also flawed. I've been in a labor union. I had my frustrations with it. But here's the way to think about it. Corporations are also flawed. And if you have flawed corporations that aren't being balanced by flawed unions, you end up with a highly unequal economy. So I think it's really interesting that more Americans are expressing interest in joining a union. Ultimately, though, I think a revitalization of organized labor in this country is going to take law changes. It's still too easy for companies that don't want their workers to join unions to do things that make it impossible for their workers to join unions.
David Leonhardt, thanks so much for being with us. David is the author of Ours Was the Shining Future.